Ladies and gentlemen, Cage Talk. Welcome back to another episode of Cage Talk. Today, I have a guest. It's a former, the very first UFC welterweight champion. We have the UFC Hall of Famer and buddy of mine, Pat Miletich. How you doing, Pat?
Doing good, Alex. Good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, you too, man. Like I said, we've talked a million times before about your career and how you started and all that good stuff. What would be your, I would say, you started fighting way before you even got into the UFC, right? I was noticing that you had a shit ton of bouts under your belt already.
Yeah. Before I got to the UFC, I believe I had 21 professional fights, but I had a lot of kickboxing, K1 rules fights, and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, definitely. How'd you end up getting into, especially at that time, because everything was fairly new with, not only MMA, but just combat sports.
I ended up in karate and kickboxing through a work buddy who gave me a free pass to go to a gym. I had done some amateur boxing training at Albino Pena's gym, Davenport Boxing Club, when I was younger, and gosh, I think sophomore, freshman in high school time, middle school even. But most of it, I was doing a lot of wrestling, playing football, stuff like that. Those were my focuses at the time. But getting into the karate and the kickboxing stuff, I thought, gosh, back then it was the '80s, right? So it's for me, back then, I think the Jean-Claude Van Damme movies or whatever the hell was going on, it was like, I'd actually like to be able to throw some kicks and learn that part of things, because I was definitely into the combative part of life, having grown up wrestling my whole life and everything else.
And for that instance, again, not a lot of people, especially back in the day when MMA was starting, no one really thought about it as a career. Did you think about it at all as a career, or you just as yourself just wanted to be competitive and just kind of join and do stuff like that?
Well, it started out, doing it was just for the love of it, the passion of martial arts and that sort of thing. But as I gained skill sets and got better and started to excel, the goal was win a title in kickboxing, and then the UFC was created. And, obviously when I watched the first UFC, it was, to me, it was a little compelling, wondering, well, all of these guys are using their own individual arts. They seem like they're attached to them with their ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just because of my, I guess, varied experiences with wrestling, with some boxing, with just knowing how dangerous certain people were with certain things and tools, I instantly recognized that people were limiting themselves by their beliefs instead of saying, oh, I'm going to be, a wrestler and I'm going to go in and win, or I'm a karate guy, or I'm a kickboxing guy, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I just recognized that everybody was clinging to their own system like it was some sort of religion, when we're not. We're intended to be more open-minded than that and absorb all the knowledge we can and be really dangerous in all different areas.
Yeah, I think, and you know what? It's funny that you say that, because Randy Couture was, I had him on the show, and he was someone who said the same thing, is that, everyone was just out to prove everyone's style, who had the better style, and that's it. And they didn't really try to adapt anything from the other styles, just kind of stuck with what they know and
Right.
try to beat you with that. So the fact that you kind of had that open mind already, that set, kind of set you apart from everyone else already there.
Well, if I would have been, a two-time NCAA Division I national champ and an Olympic silver medalist or something, I may have had a different viewpoint. But for me, it was, okay, I'm not the best guy in the world at wrestling. I'm good. I'm not great. I'm not a world champ or anything like that, anywhere near that. I was limited a lot as well by health issues as a kid, respiratory disease and things like that, that I eventually figured out and cured myself because doctors didn't know what they were doing, but didn't know what they were looking at, whatever. Um, so that changed my horizons completely too. Going from breathing through a straw full of mucus, like I was saying before, we've talked about this, and struggling to breathe every single wrestling match to suddenly breathing through a gigantic, what felt like a giant, clear, totally clear PVC tube and being able to breathe perfectly and have great endurance, that changed my perspective on a lot of things too. My training could explode even higher, a lot more effortless breathing, doing things physically I never dreamed of, endurance wise and strength wise, and waking up the next day and being able to do it again that totally changed my perspective. So maybe had I learned and figured out how to heal myself earlier and
Mm-hmm.
been much better endurance wise and capable of wrestling at a much higher level because of that. Who knows? Everything happens for a reason, though, right?
Definitely, definitely. And you doing all these competitions and stuff, how did you land into the UFC? Again, I've heard several different stories about other fighters, especially back in, when UFC first started. What's your story, Pat?
Well, I had fought in the Battle of the Masters twice. Those were no weight division, no rules, no time limit, 8-man tournaments, and won both of those, the first two, and then did a bunch of other fights. And eventually, John Peretti took over as the matchmaker at the UFC, and he's the guy that made the modern, really the father of the modern rules of MMA. But at the same time, my former manager Monty Cox and I actually wrote the rules for the State of Iowa Athletic Commission.
Really?
They said you guys write the rules, we'll pass it, and then we'll get started. So Iowa, I believe, still to this day,
Mhm.
even before New Jersey Athletic Commission and Larry Hazard, it was Larry Dawson in the state of Iowa that were really the first sanctioning body that I remember for the sport of MMA.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
And they basically what just asked you to, hey, whatever you think complies with the rules of MMA or how things work, or how did that work out?
Yeah, I mean, we put in the rounds, we put in some of the rules, no headbutts on the ground. We tried to be common sense, with the lawmakers and the athletic commissions and the way they were really blackballing us from having our own sport. We had to
Sure.
use a little bit of common sense and understand that, there has to be time limits, weight divisions, certain rules, all that. And so for the most part, the modern MMA, those are the rules that we wrote for the state of Iowa.
Gotcha. And then what did you tell like people like on a normal day-to-day basis once you were in the UFC and you were known? Did you tell them that you were a cage fighter? I bet you back in the day like people like would look at you like you had 8 heads and shit.
Well, there was a lot of conversations on airplanes coming back. Some of the guys would be a little beat up, black eyes, whatever. And
Uh-huh.
all of us, get on a plane and we all have cauliflower ears and no necks and all that sort of stuff. They'd be like, "Are you guys a rugby team, or are you this, or are you that?" Then we tell them, and usually by the end of the plane flight, you'd have new fans. They're like, "Holy shit, there's a lot to this, right? There's a lot of endurance, there's a lot of strength conditioning, diet, a lot of different disciplines of martial arts you have to master to go into it and learn it." So people actually you have to become a diplomat for the sport that you're trying to educate people on, right? So that was a big thing. And back in those days, you know, because we were so highly scrutinized, we couldn't really be just WWE type garbage talkers and act like fools and all that sort of stuff. Things you see nowadays with a Conor McGregor, doing his thing and being crazy and ridiculous. Well, that would not have pushed the sport over the top at all. So we couldn't really put on a facade to try and sell more tickets or any of that stuff. We had to be ourselves and understand that our job was to assist the sport in growing, because ultimately we weren't a bunch of barbarians. We were thinking logical human beings who were athletes, and that's just kind of what we had to do.
Yeah. That's wild, especially back in the day. Like you put in, like you said, you were kind of like neck and neck with the sport. You're trying to help make it grow, not um, decrease it, its value and stuff. Um, Especially nowadays. I mean, you guys paved the way for what these fighters can do nowadays. Like fighting camps and stuff. Like again, Pat Miletich training camp facility. It's one of the very top, very well known organization and for fighting and stuff. How did that come about? Was that always in your future when you were fighting that you wanted to set up a system like that? And how did it come to fruition?
Well, it really kind of got created early on. My great uncle Johnny Miletich was a 1932 Olympic boxing team member. He was a catch as catch can wrestler. He would go to carnivals and state fairs,
Oh wow.
and the carnival strongmen would do feats of strength, and then they'd say to the crowd, if there's anybody in the crowd that wants to come up and challenge me in a catch as catch can wrestling match, which was submission grappling back in the day in the 20s and 30s, and or box, you could do that. And my uncle would get up, volunteer, and beat the hell out of them. That's how he would do things. And so, for me, it was kind of early on because I had to train people, so I had good training partners, right? So I kind of created a conveyor belt system of fundamentals for building footwork and head movement, defensive skills, and then striking skills. Everything, the fundamentals of defense and movement and mechanics always came first for me.
Okay.
And I think that comes from being coached by really good coaches in wrestling and football my whole life,
Mm-hmm.
and boxing as well. So I started with the mechanics with people, and once they understood the mechanics, the basics, for instance, ground fighting, it was all about position. It was all about how to attain or get out of bad positions.
Mm-hmm.
And once you learned how to control position in a fight, you're most likely going to win that fight. Same thing with striking. If you're decent with your footwork and head movement and things like that, if they can't hit you, they can't hurt you type thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's really that's how but it started early on, and then getting guys as good as I could get them as quickly as I could get them good, and then and turning them loose. And that's kind of how we did things. We were, just a bunch of young guys getting after it, and a lot of intensity. So,
Well, what would you say if you had to choose like maybe like a word or something that would describe the your system, the Pat Miletich like camp and stuff? Would it be
a term would be just common sense,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
There's you know no 3-point shots,
Hmm.
in my fighting system, so to speak. It was all layups, right? Fundamentals.
Nice and easy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Fundamentals. Outwork everybody. One of my favorite sayings was, you know, I, I'm, I would rather fight a great fighter in mediocre shape than a mediocre fighter in great shape. Because the mediocre fighter who's in incredible condition
Hmm.
is going to just walk you down like a zombie the whole fight. They
Hmm.
can take massive amounts of abuse, and they're going to keep coming. So that's you know, if we have really solid fundamentals and we work harder than everybody else, and our conditioning is on a whole different level a whole different level than everybody else. If our fight training is more torturous than any fight could ever be, I mean, what do I really have to worry about in a fight then?
Yeah, definitely. And again, your system just proved to everyone else, in the UFC that it worked. I mean, you had, champions like, Matt Hughes, Jens Pulver, Tim Sylvia. I mean, the list goes on of fighters that came out, of your training facility. So, and obviously you as well. So,
Yeah, I mean, again, you take guys who work really hard, most of them wrestling backgrounds, the ones that did not have wrestling backgrounds, learned the work of, the wrestling mentality
mhm.
of just constantly outworking your opponent. And that's that when you talk about Iowa wrestling, they always talk about Iowa style, which is constantly attacking, running people out of gas, and then pouring it on. You should be able to feel people melt when they finally break mentally physically. You can feel it. It's like a frozen rope that gets soft and suddenly bends. You can just feel them wilt in your hands, and once you feel that, then you understand, when people mentally break.
After, and now I'm assuming you felt that during a fight and shit, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah, and it would be during repeated scrambles, right? Scramble, recover, scramble, recover, scramble, recover, and we did a particular type of training, anaerobic aerobic crossover training, that allowed us to, we would recover faster from those scrambles. And so as we would recover and stand on the gas pedal sooner than our opponent was ready to, they fell further and further behind in the gas tank, division or department, I should say. And that's really what it was about, just continually making them go when they didn't want to go. When they wanted to rest, we made them fight, right? So and that's really what it comes down to, is forcing people to be very uncomfortable, not liking, that they can't decide when the fight happens and when it doesn't. We decide that, right?
Yeah, of course.
And that changes things a lot.
And like I said, the fundamental, I think that the MMA aspect part of that is, the basics. Any background is wrestling. I think that's the strongest suit, because that you can control the fight wherever it goes. Standing on the
Yeah,
ground.
yeah. And not depend on it though, right? To look, if I'm dangerous enough with everything, that spreads out their defense. So if I have the ability to knock people out who are good stand-up fighters, and they have to actually respect that I might knock them out, it makes my takedowns that much easier, and vice versa, right? So that's really what it comes down to, and that's what allows a guy who's not a world-class wrestler to be able to wrestle with a world-class wrestler in a mixed martial arts fight, because he's spread out defensively so much that he can't cover all his bases.
Now, so you would, if say someone that's watching this, or starting to maybe peak interest into fighting or anything like that, you would say they're to start off for MMA, you would basically tell them, hey, go wrestle first, start off basic wrestling.
If they're young enough, yeah. If they're young enough, definitely you should join the wrestling team and wrestle as much as you can and learn the fundamentals and the work ethic and the endurance needed. I mean, there's nothing harder than going takedowns with a good wrestler.
Yeah.
There's nothing harder. I mean, probably the next toughest thing that I could find in terms of combative sports is just boxing with a world-class boxer. They're endurance wise, I mean, there are two different types of endurance. One is anaerobic, the other is aerobic.
Okay.
But they're both extremely difficult. When you step into their waters with them, if I'm wrestling with a world-class wrestler when I'm, in my prime, I'm going to be tired. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The warm-ups during the summer, when I would just go up and train with the Hawk Wrestling Club, guys that were Iowa wrestlers, plus guys on the Olympic ladder, stuff like that, dude, their warm-ups would literally destroy people. I mean, their warm-ups are incredibly difficult. And, then vice versa, when I would spar with world-class and world champion boxers, you want to talk about fatigued and you're bleeding.
It's just another level, right? It's just another level that.
Yeah. But the thing is the whole idea is, if I'm sparring with a really good boxer, I want him to, and I want to be able to go 10, 12 rounds with that person, so that when I fight a mixed martial artist, they don't have that head movement. They don't have that footwork. They just defensively, they're not going to be that guy, right? So it's a total different level of striking. Boxers are gone. If you're punching where their head is, you're not going to hit them. They're gone every single time. So it's just a different level of instinct and movement altogether. So mixed martial artists these days, there are a lot of really, really good fighters. But what I found is finding that spot where I can roll with the best jiu-jitsu guys in the world and I can give them some problems. And then sparring with the best boxers in the world, best kickboxers in the world, going with wrestlers who are world class. If I can get to where I can just hang pretty decent with those guys, where I'm worthy of being in the same ring with them or on the mat or whatever it is, when I put all those tools together by fight time, I'm generally going to be probably head and shoulders above the other guy who's been training a hodgepodge of mixed martial arts with a bunch of mixed martial artists.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it can be bastardized into some really shitty fundamentals, terrible footwork, terrible defensive skills. Guys are, well, they can all have great offense, but, you know, it's like the way I put it is a lot of the mixed martial artists today kind of have the offense of the Harlem Globetrotters and at the same time the defense of the Washington Generals, right? It's no fucking defense whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I like that one. That was good. That was good.
Well, you know, I tell younger fighters, do you want to be able to spell your name when you're 50?
Yeah.
You know, do you actually want to have a memory? Do you want to be able to articulate and, you know, go into the corporate world and get a job? Are you going to be able to sit down at a meeting and have an intellectual conversation about what's going on in your company or the world or whatever it is? If you're punch drunk, you're just not doing that. You're not going to be able to do it.
100%. I mean, that's where it comes down to at the end of the day, right? You know, because fighting is not forever. It's not. Unfortunately, it's not. You know,
right. It should be a springboard onto other things in life.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And you've done that throughout your career. Not only, you know, were you the first UFC welterweight champion, being in the Hall of Fame, you also trained law enforcement too, right? You have some background in that. I want to hear about that because that was always interesting. I know when we were talking a little bit, you were talking
Yeah,
about.
I've done that for a lot of years. I got my start in the law enforcement stuff was one of my training partners, one of my best friends, Mark Hansen, who's now I believe a captain with the Davenport Police Department, but very, very knowledgeable guy, very good at literally all kinds of different. When it comes to the police world, he knows his stuff. Like he knows SWAT tactics. He knows, you know, everything from one end of the spectrum to the other. He's very, very high level guy, very high speed operator, you know, knows his stuff. And called me up, said, "Hey man, you want to help me train my department today?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So that's how I got my start. And it's funny because I remember still to this day, the first time I was called to literally train a group of police officers, one of the cops looks at me and he goes, "Hey Pat, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He goes, what would you do if you were in this position?" And I said, "Well, I'd choke him unconscious." And he goes, "Yeah, but we can't do that." And I go, "Why can't you?" And he goes, "Well, we have this thing called use of force continuums, where the escalation of force and, you know, all of that sort of stuff that goes with it." And I go, "Well, that makes zero sense, but I get it. You know, you have to follow a certain rule set, and you have to unfortunately allow the bad guy to, you know, raise the stakes, you know, before you can escalate all that." It makes sense, you know, common sense, and, you know, actual human beings think that way, right?
Mhm.
I don't want to hurt people.
Mhm.
I'm going to do my best to control them, get them in prone position, put handcuffs on them so that nobody gets hurt, things like that. That's intelligent thinking. Um, but for me, if I'm in a situation on the street where someone's actually physically attacking me, my job is to, well, preserve my own life and end the confrontation as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Which generally, now that I'm obviously a little more skilled and was as well back then, you don't necessarily need to hurt people to do that, but sometimes you actually do. Sometimes you've got to, you know, incapacitate a human being so that they're not going to hurt you or others, right?
Mhm.
So but it was funny because he laughed at me, you know, like, "Dude, I can't do that. I can't just start with choking people unconscious." So,
Go
but
straight for
but yeah, so it went from that and then into National Guard troops and then military groups and, you know, all the different branches for the most part, and then some special forces groups,
Oh,
a lot of that as well. So
are you still
different
doing that?
jobs. Yeah, I still get calls on that, but you know, it's COVID really screwed that up for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, the hands-on type stuff and close interaction with people was put on hold for quite a while. But you know, for me, when I'm training law enforcement and military, I'm not training them to be mixed martial arts fighters. That's not what it's about. You know, the fundamentals of control, getting out of bad positions, um, you know, the hands, the head, the hips, you know, all those fundamentals of control is super important no matter what kind of situation you're in, physical
Mhm.
confrontation. and especially paying attention to the hands, because if you can control hands and they can't put them on you or grab their, if they have a knife, a gun, whatever. If you're paying attention to the hands, usually that's kind of a really big part of it. But the head, the hands, and the hips are the three components to keep it simple for people who don't train full time, for them to understand the severity and how things. Because give you an example. My old business partner and I were doing. We had 88 different groups of 4 instructors. So those 4 instructors, whether they were combatives instructors in the military or law enforcement, would come up on a scenario where my business partner and I were breaking into a car. That's all we were doing. We weren't doing anything necessarily violent. And once they came up on us and pulled their weapons, which they're training weapons, not real weapons, we just turned toward them and put our hands up and go, we don't have any weapons. And basically we just said, what are you going to do about it? And so while we walked toward them to put pressure on them, they were trying to reholster their weapons to go hands on with us, because we don't have weapons.
Yeah.
And so anyway, when they would go hands on, it's 4 on 2, and they were trying to get us to the ground, get us in cuffs. Well, we were just basically being passive resistors. We weren't punching them, kicking them. We weren't doing anything. We just weren't letting them take us to the ground. Right. And in the process, we would remove 1 or 2 off the 4 training weapons out of their holsters and say, bang, bang, we're shooting you with your own weapon. So 87 of the 88 teams, at least one person got shot before they could respond with their own weapons. The one team of 4 that did not sustain any shots on them was a group from Las Vegas, law enforcement from Las Vegas. And so that tells you how important hands are and paying attention to what hands are doing. Because after every scenario, the 87 anyway, they would all look down at their own holsters to see whose weapon got pulled off of them and who was responsible for them getting shot. Right. And when they would realize who the guy or 2 guys were that were responsible for losing their weapon in those scuffle scenarios, you can just see the looks at them, like, you're the one that got us, like, you got us killed, bro. You got us killed. Yeah. And so it is very, so I tell law enforcement and military, it all comes down to, paying attention to the hands. Where are the hands at? What are they doing at all times? Obviously, posture, just the simple thing. People can look up a video of a Texas constable, God rest his soul, where he pulled some gentlemen out of a vehicle and they all took their hats off and put them on the trunk of the car. Well, just that one signal should have told him to get the hell away from them and pull his weapon and create distance and go, all of you get on the ground, because they jumped him and they took his gun and they killed him. So there's just little signals. Somebody turns their hat backwards. They change their stance, their body posture. They tense up, make a fist, whatever. There's a lot of different signals that people need, different cues that say, okay, a fight's about to start and I need to be ready. Create distance, whatever it is you got to do.
I think a lot of people are unaware of situations like that, body motions and stuff, unless, like I said, unless you're training, intensely. But a lot of people are kind of unself-aware about their surroundings or just anything in general. They're just kind of they're here to, if something does happen, they're quick to pull out the phone, then do something about it. That's unfortunate.
And that's the thing is, for people not paying attention. There's people that will follow you and you're not aware that they're following you, especially women, right? Just not aware of it. Unfortunately, just a couple of weeks ago, 3 police officers in Fargo, North Dakota were shot by a guy who was actively hunting, as it turns out, police officers. He had a ton of ammo, weapons, and all kinds of crazy stuff in his vehicle. They were at a automobile accident, investigating an automobile accident. The guy pulled up and got out and with an automatic or semi-automatic and started shooting the police officers. And unfortunately, one of them has passed away. He was a combat veteran, only been on the department for 3 months, all that sort of stuff. So it's unfortunately, but we're in a situation in society where, you have to keep your head on a swivel almost at all times and paying attention to your surroundings. And that's something that I just have done instinctually for a lot of years, just because I've been in the middle of fights where there's 100 people fighting, and you have to figure out how to get out of there.
Mhm.
Whether you have to sneak out or you have to fight your way out, I've had to do both. Um, getting out of there safely is important when you've got that much chaos and that much violence. You tend to pay attention to your surroundings because you don't want to be in those situations anymore. I was at a boxing show, um, gosh, probably 6 months ago,
Mhm.
and one of the local guys who's very popular in town was fighting, and he was it was the main event, and he was behind on the cards, and there was already some fights in the crowd and some stuff going on. Things were pretty charged in the crowd, and as he fell behind on the cards, I looked at the rest of the people who had invited me to sit at their table. I said, "I'm out. I'm leaving. I don't like the way things are looking, and I'm out of here." And they literally went, "If Pat's leaving, that means something. We're all leaving."
Yeah, we're all getting the hell out of here then. Yeah.
And they got up and they followed me out of the building, and we left. And on the way down the road, while we were driving away from the location where the fights were, there
Uh-huh.
was 10 squad cars going the opposite direction with their lights on toward the fights. Right. So it's just instinct, knowing energy. You got to pay attention to people's energy, stuff like that.
It's wild stuff, man. Especially, yeah, like you said before, though, like the energy, um, feeling it, especially the crowd and stuff. You already know that the crowd's already hyped up. There's been multiple fights, and you can sense it though. It's
Yeah. The local hero's about to lose a what they're going to consider a controversial decision,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose, and you're stuck in the middle of it.
What's the craziest fight you've been in? Is it more about bar fights? Has it been on the street? Has it just been a random like altercation? Because I know that there was fighters that have gotten people that recognize them and, oh, you're a fighter, and they think they could fight you because you're a fighter, or challenge
Well,
you.
I mean, I haven't been in any fights for years, of course, but back in the day when I was working security at nightclubs and all
Mhm.
that sort of stuff, I've been in some crazy ones with large numbers of people, police dogs diving into the pile, snowstorms. We're in the middle of a one-way fighting, back to back with police officers, with dogs, like I said, jumping into the pile, all that sort of stuff. But I've been in fights with biker gangs. I've been in fights with rugby teams. I've been in fights with,
Jeez.
you name it. I've I've been at it, and I guess for me, I've always had a good uh, ability to visualize. So something that I spent a lot of time doing, wrestling, visualization of wrestling, not being able to fall asleep before big wrestling matches, or just visualizing doing everything correctly, uh, visualizing literally night after night after night of every component of every fight, every scenario you could be in, whether I'm in an airport, in a bar, in a restaurant, in a cage, all those things. I always try to go through scenarios, and it's not. It's a lot of people would go, that's a bit extreme. It's really not, because I've gone through every scenario possible in my mind so that when it happens, I know what to do and where I'm going. Right.
So that's helped you in matches as well. I'm assuming, visualizing the fight, how it goes. If you taking him down or you
Oh
dropping
yeah.
him, things like
Yeah.
that.
And I would visualize being in horrible situations as well and being able to get out of them, having the composure. It's like when I fought Tony Carter, was it Tony Carter? Yeah. Our first fight. I totally spaced that he was a Greco-Roman national champion. I
Uh,
tied up upper body with him, and I was getting ready to hit him with a throw. I had double unders on him,
mhm,
and I was stepping the angle to block a leg and hit him with a throw, and he had double overs, and he just hit belly to belly and just launched me. And
mhm.
I'm flying through the air, and literally while I'm in the air, flying through the air, I'm going, "You're a complete dumbass." And I land, and then he puts me in a headlock, and I punch him with my outside arm, my top arm,
Mhm.
and it knocks his head into my head and gives me a gash over my eye. So
Oh,
now he threw me, put me in a headlock, and I punched him, and now I'm cut. And I kept cussing myself. I'm like, you literally, are you really this dumb? So then I went, okay, I know how to get out of this. It's not a big deal. So then I escaped the headlock, and then from the rest of the pretty much the rest of the time, I beat the living hell out of it. But
That's
you know,
funny that you thought about that
but
as he was flipping
yeah,
you.
but I visualized being in those situations and how to get out of them and having some composure and just thinking my way through it. And that's what you have to do. Most people are going to panic.
Yeah.
If firecrackers go off, people shit their pants, right?
Hmm.
They're just okay. Step behind something that'll give you cover, evaluate what's going on, and then go from there, right? That sort of stuff. But most people, they've never been under that level of stress. They've never been in a fight. They've never been punched in the face, any of that stuff, which power to them. They figured out how not to get punched in the face. That's awesome. They stayed out of those areas where that can happen. But the point is that most people just don't know how to react under that level of stress.
That's something. I mean, I said some people the fight or flight, fight or flight, right? It's either you fight or you freeze, and a lot of people
Right.
tend to freeze, especially in situations like that.
Well, just the simple thing like if there's a reason you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because people get trampled to death, right? That's what we're talking about is that when people panic, it's just like a bunch of monkeys that just panic and run each other over. Right. And that's why I don't like being around big crowds very often.
You have a point. It's good. I mean, through your experience as well, right? I mean, you got to know. But,
Humans, so if it's just you and I and a couple other people in a building and something goes wrong, we're going to evaluate the situation. We're going to talk. We're going to say move toward the door. We're going to do whatever, right? So most of the time, that's in small groups. We're going to react accordingly with common sense. But for whatever reason, when crowds are hit with anything stressful, and they
yeah,
start to all move toward the door, there's no communication. It's just a bunch of people screaming and trampling each other, and that's how people get killed, right?
yeah, yeah. That used to happen over here in Miami with the Black Fridays. They would have to put barriers because people would, once those door busters would open up, they would just trample each other. They didn't care trying to get a TV or something. Black Friday.
Now, think not to go off on a tangent, but think about this: people are trampling each other and beating each other half to death on full stomachs. Wait till there's a time when there's no food.
Oh God. Don't even start with that one.
How's your supply chains in Miami, bro?
They're okay. Now I'm in Texas, so Texas is good. Miami,
Okay, okay, yeah,
Miami.
there you go.
Let's talk about UFC. 16. You fought two people, and um, how you won your title. Can you talk to me about maybe that whole, I guess, process between getting to the UFC and training wise and your opponents? If you obviously knew one of them, right? I'm assuming, kind of.
Chris Brennan, yeah, I had fought him before, of course, and
Hmm.
so John Peretti said I'm creating the 170-pound division, so be ready to go. And he did the four-man tournament in New Orleans for that UFC 16 event, and so I fought Townsend Saunders first, who's a Olympic silver medalist freestyle wrestler, and so I won that by decision. I was terrified fighting him because I had trained with really good wrestlers my whole life.
Okay.
I had never wrestled with an Olympic silver medalist before, but I knew the guys that I grew up wrestling with and some of the
Hmm.
guys that I trained with who were, extremely high level wrestlers. I knew how strong, they were, how explosive they were, all that sort of stuff. So I was like, going against a little different pedigree of human being,
Hmm.
So I was very, very, I don't know how to, I fought very safe to say the least. I fought very safe to say the least. And had I not thrown any kicks or knees, he probably would have never gotten any takedowns. I should have just went out and boxed and just stuffed his takedowns and beat him up and got him out of there. But nonetheless, it was a back and forth a little bit, obviously, but won the decision and then fought Chris Brennan because Mikey Burnett had beaten Eugenio Taddeo from Brazil in the other side of the bracket. And Mikey Burnett was, backstage basically puking, exhausted. And so they said he had a broken hand or whatever, but he was shot. He was just physically shot. And so they put me up against Chris Brennan for the final fight, and then I was able to submit him, in that fight. But no, it was very very cool experience, and
Mhm.
nice realization of finally getting into what they call the big dance, or so to speak, right?
Yeah. And back then it seemed like that happened occasionally, right? That you would have like these tournaments, you have these brackets, and then eventually maybe the winner from the last fight pulled out because it seemed like a lot of people were just exhausted, right? Exhausted, broken hand, something happened. I mean, Royce Gracie did it back in the day as well. So it's the same thing with Ken Shamrock as well too.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
uh, what do you think about that? Was it something? I mean, was it just the way the format was? Was it just like I said? It was just people weren't ready to fight maybe multiple times a night. I mean, that's unheard of nowadays. That's it's kind of illegal, right?
Right, right.
you
Well, as
know?
long as you can do it, you just have certain time constraints on how much time a guy can spend you know, in the
Mhm.
cage, right? So you could do one 5 minute round for one round of the fight, another 5 minute round, and then the championships 3 5 minute rounds, and then 8 man tournament, or however you would do that.
Mhm.
So that's the accumulation of total time in the cage in one night is, I think, how they base it. But yeah, I mean, the training would have to be a lot of the training that I would do for tournaments back in the day would be I would have one guy with gloves and shin pads and a headgear on, and we would spar. And if somebody got a takedown, then a new guy would jump in, and you'd have to pull the gloves off at least to be able to grapple and
Jeez.
do all that sort of stuff. And then if somebody escaped and got back to their feet, they'd hurry up and throw the gloves back on you, and you're back sparring with the original guy. And so they would just tag team you like that and go and go and
Mhm.
go and go for hour, 2 hours at a time sometimes. And that's the
Mhm.
way the training would go, just so that you were ready for multiple fights, that could take a while, to say the least. So the no time limit, no rules, no weight divisions, all that stuff. That's definitely the Wild West days.
Yeah.
And my style back then was just absolute complete reckless abandon and get them out of there as fast as I could,
Hmm.
because I wanted to have energy for the semifinal and then the final. And usually the way it worked out for the most part.
And I mean, you ended up fighting Mikey Burnett after, right? You had UFC Brazil, didn't you do
UFC
that?
Brazil,
Yeah,
UFC
right.
Brazil, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Which was that was a horrible fight, horribly boring, um, strategic fight where actually I think I honestly was the better boxer, but I
Hmm.
chose to try and wrestle with him and force him to the ground because I didn't think he'd last long with me on the ground. But the guy, I mean, he was bench pressing like over 400 pounds and
Shit.
squatting over 400, 500 pounds, whatever at the time. Dude, he was solid as a piece of granite. He was very, very strong, and he was a very good wrestler.
Hmm.
So I was having trouble getting him off his feet. So it was just two guys trying to impose their will, but it was, yeah, horribly boring fight. It's like that's by far the shittiest fight I've ever had. So
And then you kind of went on a little run, right? You fought in UFC, and then you were fighting also in. I mean, it says it right here, a cage combatant, and you were in WEF, and then you did a couple other things. So you were kind of bouncing from promotion to promotion. How'd that work out?
the UFC back then allowed you to do that
Oh, it did,
because
right?
they weren't paying us enough back then to expect us to stick to exclusivity clauses and all of that. And it was interesting. I fought 3 times in 1 month. I did a UFC fight, defended my title. Then I did a pro boxing match. Then I fought in Hawaii, all in 1 month. And the fight in Hawaii, it's funny when I tell the story. The promoter of that show in Hawaii, TJ Thompson, he said, "Do you want to fight for me?" And I said, I'll be coming off 2 fights at that point in 1 month. I said, it's got to be just an easy opponent. And he goes, okay, I'll find you an easy guy from Japan, because I want to get the Japanese crowd here, all that, and just set you up with a really super easy opponent so we can get them here and use your name and all that. I'm warming up in the locker room. I'm not even paying attention, dude. Like I'm going for a vacation
Uh-huh.
and totally not paying attention. And I'm warming up in the locker room, and Frank Shamrock's in the locker room. And I look at Frank and I go, "So Frank, you know much about this guy I'm fighting, Jataro Nakao?" And he goes, "You're kidding, right?" And I go, "No, I'm totally serious. Like, do you know much about him?" He goes, "Pat, he's the #1 guy in Shudo. He's fucking good. Like this guy's like dangerous as fuck." And I go, "Wait a minute, what?" And he goes, "Yeah, dude, this guy is like fucking really, really good."
And for Frank to
And
say that, that means something.
yeah, so I go out, and it wasn't, I could take him down pretty much at will,
Hmm.
but we're standing up, and he's a lefty, and he's the first Japanese guy I'd ever fought that like felt really super solid, like super strong, right? And he was taller than me. He was a big guy,
Yeah.
and he was a southpaw, like a lot of Japanese fighters are. But I threw a right hand, and he timed it, and he hit me with a liver kick with his shin bone, perfect timing, and it literally ripped the air out of me. And I went, "Oh shit! Now I'm kind of in trouble." Well, I thought, okay, this isn't cool at all. I'm going to take him down, and I'm just going to get him out of here. I'm going to finish him. So I had already passed his guard, already mounted him once or twice in the fight. And so I could own him on the ground. I knew that. So I pass his guard, I get mount, and he works his way back to half guard. And remember, I'm on vacation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I go, okay, no big deal. He's back to half guard. I'll just get back to mount eventually. Not a big deal. Totally nonchalant mentality.
Uh-huh.
And then he gets me back in guard. And I'm like, okay, no big deal. I can take back the mount anytime I want. I've already shown myself that a couple of times. And all of a sudden he stuffs a wrist, and I'm in a triangle. And so I sit back, and I think to myself, three different ways. I'm going through the three different ways I'm going to escape the triangle, right? And then all of a sudden, I'm at a house party, and I'm standing on the stairs inside of a house, and there's the whole living room is full of people,
Uh-huh.
and there's somebody turning up the volume on a live album, and so you can hear the crowd noise on the live album, right? And so I wake up, and it to Jataro Nakao standing on the ropes like this, and I'm like, oh, dude.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah,
Nuts.
I went from being in the middle of a fight to a house party, and the crowd noise on the live album at the house party was the crowd
Is the
inside the arena.
crowd. That's wild. Holy shit. I
Yeah,
don't think I ever heard that one before. That's wild.
yeah, it was, yeah. Trust me, it's very wild. I mean, it was a blink of an eye,
Hmm.
and I was only out for not even a second. I don't think I fell back, and then I woke right back up. But it was that son of a bitch. I can't believe, because one minute you're going, okay, I'm going to get out of this with what technique do I want to use, and then I'm at a
Mhm.
house party, and I'm like,
Well, I wanted to talk to you about the Carlos Newton fight because again, you had Matt Hughes fight him the very next match for him. Again, he took your title away, but again, he got you. It was a bulldog, right? Which is
mm-hmm.
which is
Yeah.
very unheard of. And I mean, I've talked to Carlos about it, and I told him like I've never seen someone's fucking back and they're like he used everything he had for that. Like there was no way like that shit
Well, the
hurt.
thing is getting out of a bulldog choke is actually fundamentally very easy.
Okay.
So it's you grab their far trap muscle, and you basically scoop under their near leg, and you just roll them back onto their back. Your neck's protected by their body, and then you're good to go,
Hmm.
right? Well, he had wedged himself in against the cage and the bar inside the cage, the structure. So I couldn't budge him. I went to roll him backwards, and I couldn't do shit. I couldn't roll him at all. And so he strategically, like, that was, he did a very it was very smart of him, because at that point, uh, for several minutes, I was noticing that he was really huffing and puffing. Like he
Okay.
was he was he was getting pretty tired, and I felt I was feeling actually pretty energized. I was like, I'm not even tired. This is
Hmm.
awesome. And it was a fun fight. That fight was an absolute blast. Even though I lost, I still think that was one of the funnest fights I've ever been in. Because he was an incredible athlete. He really was, and a very good martial artist. And so when he was on top of me in my guard, he was hitting me, but I noticed his breathing was pretty heavy. And so I said to myself, okay, if I just stand up, I'm going to knock him out. I already know. I'm going to finish him because I was definitely getting the best of him standing up. And so I just stood up. I just got up, walked up the cage, and I took my underhook out. And because I think I was overconfident at that point, I took my underhook out. And once I took my underhook out, he spun hard. And I went to step backwards and go out the back door to lock around his body to take him down. And he just dropped.
Yeah.
He scooped it and dropped it. It was a brilliant technique by him. And, lapse in judgment by me, you put the two together and my title's in his hands, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is what it is.
Yeah. And then after that, there was something that you couldn't do a rematch clause for him. Like what was
it was an automatic rematch clause. All I had to do was go and fight one more fight, win that fight, and then I had an automatic rematch against Carlos Newton.
Uh-huh.
So they called me after I knocked out Shoney Carter with a head kick in our second fight. And so they said, it's on for this date in Las Vegas. And I said, okay, I'm going to start training. And then they literally called me back later that day and said, dude, we can't do this because it's the exact same co-main event as we had the first time you guys fought. So it was Pedro Hizzo, Randy Couture, and you and Carlos in the Trump Taj Mahal.
Uh-huh.
And it'll be the same. It'll look like we don't even have any fighters. And they're like, so we want to do this. We'll either let someone else fight Carlos from a different camp, or you can pick your guy to put in there against him. And I said, well, I have to stick to my word. I promised Matt Hughes I'd make him a world champ. And I said, so if anybody should get the shot, it should be Matt. So I said, okay, we'll go with Matt. And so I called Matt down on the farm and said, you need to get up here and start training. You're fighting Carlos for the title. And he goes, no, you got an automatic rematch clause. That's your fight. And I said, no, they're not going to let me do it. You're going to take the title back. We're going to get you in shape, and you're going to go take the title back and bring it back here to this gym. So the history is that's how it fell, man. He trained hard and went back and took the title back from Carlos and got it out of the friggin' Canucker's hands and brought it back here.
Like that, yeah. Now, when you made that decision with Matt, was it kind of like you already, not that you knew, but you knew that you were never going to fight Matt because, again, he was in your training camp. So if he was going to win that belt, I mean, that division was not over for you, but you weren't going to try to go back and compete.
Well, my thing is I held the title for almost 4 years, so I was fine with that.
Okay.
I had no problem. Where my rub was with the UFC at the time is after Matt won the title, I said, just let me be like the guard at the gate. I'll test the talent, right? I don't need to be champ again. I don't need to do that. Just let me fight out the rest of my contract or whatever at 170, and I'll ride off into the sunset. And they said, no, you've kind of trained yourself out of a position in that weight division, because at the time, I believe I had Jason Black, Robbie Lawler, Matt Hughes, and myself all from the same camp in the same weight division for the most part. I mean, Black fought at 155 as well, but they went, you coached yourself out of a position in that weight division. So you got to move up to 185. And I wasn't big enough for, I walked around at 192 pounds, fighting guys that are cutting down from, 215, 220 or more. So when they forced me out of that weight division, it made me kind of understand the business side that, look, once you've served your usefulness for the machine, they don't care. They just don't care. And so that's why I tell young fighters who are coming up, super important, that, promoters are pimps and fighters are whores. And if you're going to be a whore, you better be the best one in the world and make a lot of money.
Well, you can, right?
Yeah. Before your boobies start sagging.
Well, before I let you go, man, we've talked about your career, and I mean, again, you had an amazing career. Like I said, your fighting style, your camp. I mean, you had fighters like Matt Hughes, saw that run. Tim Sylvia, which I had on the show too, cool guy. Robbie Lawler, seeing him his final, his final match, going out into the sunset in a good way. Because I mean, let's be honest, this sport's brutal, and usually, it doesn't usually end like that. And then to
Right.
see, Jens Pulver also, getting inducted in the Hall of Fame, and seeing his reaction, and seeing these were, your fighters that you helped create, and get to them. How does that make you feel as a person, as a coach as well?
Well, I think in this life we just want to serve a purpose, right? That's
Hmm.
that's per- having a true purpose is kind of important. I don't think that just coaching was a purpose, or broadcasting, or any of that stuff. I think it just comes down to how much do we want to. Sorry, the printer's going off.
That's right.
How you know how much do we want to help other people, right? And
Mhm.
that's what it comes down to. So that's in the end, that's what we're here to do, is to help other people with our knowledge, with our effort, our energy, or money, whatever it is,
Mm,
um, just to try and help other people succeed in with their dreams, right?
yeah, definitely. 100%.
Yeah,
I think, like I said, I think you've done it, and you know, you can always look back at your amazing career, and what you're continuing to do, throughout your career. I mean, it's amazing, and like I said, it was always fun watching you, and like I said, I'm always a fan, always going to be a fan, and I appreciate, the blood, sweat, and tears that you gave in the octagon, inside and outside, man. And
I appreciate it, Alex. I appreciate it, and it's been fun talking to you today.
yeah, man, it's always a blast to talk to you, and we'll keep in touch. But I want to say thank you so much for your time, because again, time is something we can't get back, my friend,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
All right, man. Well, enjoy Texas.
Thanks, man.